Hey, welcome back to the garage, everyone. All right, we've got one day left in 2022 to squeak in another video. And up next, what you're going to see is the culmination of years, no, not really, weeks maybe, a couple of days, of research that I did on driveline geometry and for which a month ago I knew absolutely nothing. However, the first part of this video will be a foray off into a little bit of a rabbit hole that I was chasing down in the tail housing of the transmission, because I suspected there might be an issue there leading to the vibration in our old Coupe DeVille. So we're going to lead into that next. It's just a few minutes of video that I recorded and then I decided to stop. It's like, yeah, this is not really the issue. I'm just going to stop this right now. I went ahead and edited the video anyway and decided to keep it in just for exploratory reasons. I figured somebody might find it beneficial because we will be removing the tail housing from the rear of the Turbo 400 transmission in the DeVille. Followed by that, we will be diving into a very detailed discussion on driveline geometry and the investigation that ensued on this old car. And I think you're going to find it pretty fascinating. So sit back, buckle up, and enjoy your favorite glass of cheap champagne, because we're going to bring in the new year the only way Impalaman's Garage knows how. We got the heater on in the background, so it's going to be a little noisy, a little chilly today. Up next, I'm going to try to keep from knocking my brains out underneath this car. But our immediate goal here is to remove this long tail housing from the back of the Turbo 400. This excessive play in this output shaft is, I don't know if it's excessive or not. I don't know if it's normal or not. But we're going to find out. So we're going to take this tail housing off and see if we can't figure out what's going on up there. All right, we're going to go ahead and lift the transmission up just a smidgen. There we go. Got it off of the mount. And up next, we're going to take these bolts loose here where the tail housing connects to the body of the transmission. All right, I really don't want to take this cross member out because it is in the way, but I'd rather not take it out because it's just a pain. We're going to try to do it without it. See how well we can do here. I have to lift the transmission up a little more, I think. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Bolt number one. Have you ever taken the tail housing off the back of a transmission before? No, I have not. How hard could it be? All I'm doing is taking these 6 bolts loose, hold the tail housing onto the back of the transmission. I don't know what the torque is, probably about 30 or 40. You know, in the back of my mind, I always suspected, the transmission might be the culprit here, but I have no idea. The reason I'm doing this is because that output shaft wobbles. And I've been watching guys rebuild Turbo 400 transmissions on YouTube, and the output shaft on all of those doesn't wobble. I'm like, okay, what's different about mine? Why does mine wobble? Okay, we're going to have to lower the transmission now because it's now too high to get to those top 2 bolts. So let's lower it. Can we just lower it? There we go. And we're gonna need an extension. Again, the cross member's in the way. If the cross member wasn't there, I could just zip, zip, zip. But I don't really want to take the cross member out, because it is a royal pain, man, and I ain't kidding you, as they say. It's back up in a hole, that's for sure. Let's see if we can get a bite on it here. There we go. Alrighty. That's it. She's loose. All right, this should just come right off of there. Yeah, it's loose. All right, I raised the transmission a little bit, and I got transmission fluid on my head now. And let's see. Let's just Let's just let the rest of the transmission fluid run out of the daggum thing, shall we? All right, we got the cross member lowered down and we got the tail housing pulled off of there. I'm gonna put this over here on the bench. All right, we are gonna take a look up inside this here transmission and see what is going on with this. What kind of, that must be the new gasket from the rebuild. It looks like a new gasket for sure. Not sure, must be something to hold that gear on. The shaft looks good. There's an O-ring here that meets up against the end of the drive shaft, apparently. Now, one would think that something like this would need to have a little play in it. You got two plastic gears here for the speedometer, and you know, they can't be just rigidly jammed up against one another. You'd think that you'd want to have a little play in there. And then there's also a plastic gear that goes onto this. I think that's the governor, if I'm not sure. Anyway, doesn't matter. Why is that the way that is? Because when I see these dudes rebuilding these transmissions, they pick up all this stuff and they shove it in that case. I don't ever see this wobbling around. What do you guys think? Is there a bushing back in behind there that's not there? It's just, they didn't put it back in, or what? Man, that really disturbs me. All right, let's get over here and take a look at this housing. All right, taking a look at these, there's two bushings down in this thing. There's one towards the end of the tail housing and there's one back in there ways. One's longer and one's shorter. I don't know enough about it to be able to know when there's wear and when there's not wear. I'll be curious to see what the play is on this thing. I think I want to mate it back up to the drive shaft. All right, I got the outer seal out so we can get down there and look at it. These two bushings appear to be around 1.5 inches. This one's got some scoring on the outside of it. I don't know much about it. I don't think that it's that big of a deal. I can't get down in there with my dial indicator. It appears to be about the same as the drive shaft, so I don't think there's a whole lot of play. Let's go ahead and slip this thing onto the drive shaft and see what happens. All right, I just walked over there and slipped it over the drive shaft without the seal in it, and it slides in there very nicely. It's not snug at all, but it's not loose either. It is a proper fit. So if, in my layman's opinion, these bushings are probably okay. You can still see the brass all over them, so I don't think they are a problem. However, some transmission guy or gal out there would probably know a lot more about it than me. That is worrisome, although it may be normal. All right, welcome back. What you just saw was the initial investigation of the tail housing. So I had thought about pulling the tail housing off and taking a look at the output shaft, because in the last several weeks I had noticed that the output shaft had a little bit of side-to-side play there. I'm not entirely convinced that's abnormal. But the bushings in the tail housing were in good order, and I took a look at that and said, you know what, I don't think the issue is here. I'm going to put this thing back together, and that's what I did. So it's back in the car, and I decided to go ahead and call a professional. Now, there is a professional classic car restoration service here in the local area, and I got a hold of the owner, actually. And he was able to talk me down off a ledge, I guess you might say, because I was able to explain the problem that I'm having with this vibration issue in detail. And once I had completed my explanation, he didn't even hesitate. The first thing out of his mouth was, "Oh, that's a pinion angle problem." I'm like, what? How could this be a pinion angle problem? This car's never been modified. It's all original. It's 51 or 52 years old, but nothing's ever changed on it, as far as I know, So I spoke to the owner of that business, and he basically talked me through that. He said he really believed this was a pinion angle issue because he builds cars all the time from scratch. He'll take a rust heap sitting in a field for 50 years and then build a brand new vehicle out of it, and they have to pay attention to driveline geometries. And this is one of the things that they have to really, really pay attention to. He told me that he'd like to have my business, but in reality, he said he felt like I could probably go research this issue and probably correct it myself. So he said, go study up on driveline geometries and pinion angles, do some more YouTube research, and see if you can't figure it out. Now, I think, you know, obviously if I can't, then he would be there to help me if just bring money. So without further ado, I'm going to describe what I have found in my research after that conversation. We're going to take a look at this area right over here under common drive shaft layouts. The first layout that you're going to see here is on the left-hand side. This is called the Z arrangement. On the left-hand side here at this universal joint, this is where the transmission will be connected, for example, and over here on the right-hand side is where the differential is connected. And this is the Z configuration, I guess for obvious reasons. It's, you know, somewhat reminiscent of a Z based on the geometry of it. The main thing to keep in mind though here is that these two operating angles, these are working angles you might say, this angle here, beta 1 and beta 2, they must be equal or extremely close to one another in order to mitigate vibrations. Now, I'm not going to go into driveline vibration theory. There's a ton of stuff on YouTube you can look at to research that. Keep in mind that these two angles need to be the same. The other driveline configuration is the W arrangement. Now, most of the stuff you're going to see on the internet is not going to talk about the W thing. You just don't see much of it. I don't know why. It is the way it is. Now this one, you can see where both of these flanges point up at the end. But again, both of these angles are the same. Either one of these will work, depending upon the layout of the vehicle. But both of the beta 1 and beta 2 operating or working angles, I believe they're called, they must be the same in either of these scenarios. So now let's go over here and take a look at what we have determined from looking at our old 71 Coupe DeVille. This line here is the engine and transmission. This middle line, this longer one, is the drive shaft. And then this line here is the pinion. So what we do is we measure the angles of each one of these three pieces in the driveline. To measure the angle of the engine and transmission, you can take your digital or analog protractor and you can put it on the transmission pan, assuming it's flat, of course. You can put a straight edge across the crank pulley, or you can use the slip yoke at the transmission. Any one of those three places that fall in line with the crankshaft inside the engine will work fine. Now what you're going to do is you're going to measure the angle between the engine and transmission and basically just horizontal, the planet Earth, right? And that is this line here, and I tried to represent it as well as I could using the squares on the diagram. So that's 6.5 degrees down. So down will be if the starting point is toward the front of the car and it's higher than the other end, which is towards the rear of the car. We're going to call that a downward angle. So 6.5 degrees down is the engine and transmission in our Coupe DeVille. Now we take a look at the drive shaft. The drive shaft is 1.8 degrees down. In other words, the part where it connects to the transmission is higher than where it connects to the pinion. The next angle we're going to take a look at is the pinion. Now the pinion is disturbing because the angle from the horizontal is at 8 degrees up. So we're pointing back up, so you can see where we fall in line with what's called the W configuration over here. So those are the angles off of horizontal. Now the next step in analyzing your driveline geometry is to determine your operating angles. Or let me go back to the where to measure or place your protractor. Clearly the second place is to put it underneath the drive shaft. And then on the third place to measure the pinion angle would be to place it basically right there on the pinion, on the flange that connects to the pinion, so that you're measuring the angle of the pinion itself. It has to be on a nice flat surface on the pinion. So let's move ahead to the next step and let's talk about operating angles or working angles, I think they might be referred to. Now, the working angles are the angles between the engine and transmission and the drive shaft, and between the pinion and the drive shaft. And you can see them denoted here and here. And these boxes are the calculation. The way you calculate the working angle for the engine and transmission to drive shaft is to take the measurement of degrees down from the engine off of the horizontal, which is 6.5, and subtract from it degrees off of the horizontal of the drive shaft. And you end up with 4.7 in this case. So let's move on to calculate the working angles of the drive shaft to pinion. The way to calculate this one is to take the number of degrees off of the horizontal of the pinion, in this case is 8, and you're going to add 1.8, which is the degrees down of the drive shaft. You're going to get 9.8, right? And you can sort of see the logic in that, right? Because this drive shaft is going downhill, the engine and transmission is going downhill, so clearly you would subtract the 1.8 from the 6.5. The two operating angles here are 4.7 and 9.8. Consequently, these two operating angles are supposed to be less than 1 degree apart. Clearly, we have a serious issue with the driveline geometry in our old Cadillac. Now, we're going to move up here and take a look at the spreadsheet that I've got here. So this is the current configuration. And I've recorded each of these, engine and transmission, drive shaft and pinion. And here are the directions, down, down, and back up. On here are your working angle calculations, same as this that's in the drawing. And this is the difference, 5.1. Clearly, that's a problem. I added in some formulas over here, and these are our projected changes which will be needed. But we'll come back to this in a few minutes. The next thing I want to move on to is briefly review the Z configuration, which you'll see 99% of the stuff on YouTube. I'm going to go over here to this next tab. And this is a representation of the Z configuration for a driveline. Here's your engine and transmission, and here's your pinion over here on the right-hand side. You will note that the engine and transmission is parallel to the pinion. The engine and transmission is pointed down towards the rear, and the pinion is pointed down towards the rear. Yes, I know the pinion housing is sort of looks like it's pointed up, but that's visually deceptive. You always talk about this in terms of moving from the front of the vehicle towards the rear. So the engine and transmission is pointed down and the pinion is pointed down. Keeping in mind that the pinion gear is actually in the middle of the diff, so it actually is lower than this part over here. Now, so you'll note that the engine and transmission and the pinion angles are parallel to one another, and here are the angles, the working angles off of the drive shaft, and you'll note that I've tried to make them as close as possible using the drawing, and clearly they match, so this configuration should be vibration free. And these three lines down here is just a visual representation of why they call it the Z configuration, just highly exaggerated. Let's move forward to the W configuration on this particular car. This is just a blown up version of what we just went through in this spreadsheet over here, but I just wanted to present it in a little bit larger visual way. So with our 71 Cadillac, the vibration here starts at above 45 to 50 miles an hour, increasing steadily, and is highly magnified under load, especially if you're going up a slight grade. And when I explained this scenario to the restoration services company, the first thing out of his mouth was, "Oh, that's a pinion angle. I know that for a fact." Okay, well, okay, that's how I got to where I'm at today. All right, so what do we need to do to fix this problem? We need to change the pinion angle, and let's go ahead and make some projections. So I have just some very basic formulas here to project the new angles. So if we take this pinion angle and we lessen it to, let's say, instead of 8, let's say we go to 6. All right, that brings us down to 3.1. That's pretty good. But keep in mind that if we take this pinion line here, and move it up, guess what else we do, right? We also change the angle of the drive shaft. and we changed the angle over here at the engine and transmission to the drive shaft. So these angles will be lessened as well, although I don't think as much. I don't know what the effect of this would be, but let's just say that, okay, if we change that to 6, this might change minutely to, so let's just call it 1.5, right? So now you see, I know this will, and I'm just going to leave this number alone up here because I have no idea what the change would be. So if we change our pinion angle a little more, let's change it to 5. So now we're getting pretty close. And that would probably go down. And of course, this is all just a swag. You know, the drive shaft angle is just a swag at this point. That's probably a little aggressive. So if we change the pinion angle to, let's say 4.5, so that gets us below the 1. They should be, the working angles should be less than 1 degree apart. So I just added a highlight there to denote that. If we get this pinion angles to somewhere between 4.5 and 5, let's change it to 4.8. It's around 1-ish, something like that. Keeping in mind that the trans angle will change. I think this will change just a little bit because the drive shaft is long, right? So the change in degree will not be as drastic as it is for the pinion. So you can see what's going on here. So these are the changes we need to make to the pinion. So let's go back to the 8 and let's go back to the original configuration. This is just way out of whack. I'm surprised it doesn't vibrate even more than it does, to be honest with you. So again, if we drop this down to 6, you can see we're coming into the line right here, 5.5, right? We're almost there. Let's go down to 5. And we'll go down to 4. I think 4 will probably do it because this drive shaft angle here is going to change, right? You know it will. So I think between 4 and 5, somewhere in that neighborhood, will probably get us to where we need to be. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to fix this car. The last slide here, I guess for lack of a better word, is a visual representation of our plan. So what do we need to do to change the pinion angle? Now, what we have here is a side representation of the Driveline, the engine and transmission, in pink here, and light blue is the drive shaft. And then, of course, here is the differential. And this center dotted circle here is the axle tube. And then, of course, this is the pinion. Up here, we have the upper trailing arms. There's 2 of them, although we can't see both of them. We're looking from the side right here. And the upper trailing arm has a pivot point on a mount on the top of the differential and a pivot point on a mount in the car frame. Consequently, there is also a lower trailing arm which bolts to the bottom of the axle tube, and this black dot is meant to denote that. And we'll talk about that in more detail in this diagram below. So how do we change the pinion angle and bring this pinion angle up? In other words, denoted by this green arrow, taking this pinion and bringing it up. This is where an adjustable rear trailing arm comes into play. I added some screw threads here to simply denote that this arm is adjustable. As a matter of fact, I found a company online who does manufacture custom adjustable rear trailing arms for early 70s Cadillacs. When those parts come in and I start to use them and I see that they're going to correct the issue, I'll go ahead and provide the manufacturing details, but until now I don't want to lead anybody astray. So now what you're going to do here, once these trailing arms are installed, you'll make the adjustment, and what you will do is you will elongate this upper trailing arm, and it will have the effect of pivoting your entire differential and axle tube configuration in a clockwise fashion, and we'll take this pinion and bring it upward. Now, how much is needed? I don't think it's going to take a lot, to be honest with you. Let's go ahead and talk about the diagram in the bottom, which looks sort of like an alien monster now that I look at it from this angle. So this is the top view, I guess you might say. the differential and the axle tubes, and here in the middle you see the upper rear trailing arms, and they go off at angles to the car frame, by the way. They're not straight. On the left and the right side, underneath the axle tubes, you'll find the lower rear trailing arms. Now these are straight and they connect to the car frame on either side, and they have pivot points as well. In some cases, I have seen like 4x4 and racing on the internet, you will get kits with whereby the upper and lower trailing arms are fully adjustable, but in this particular case, I don't think we need that. As a matter of fact, the kit I ordered, the only adjustment is in the upper trailing arms. So you'll note that the pivot point for the lower trailing arms is slightly below or on the bottom of the axle tube. It's not down here on the diff, it's on the axle tube. So taking this upper trailing arm and pushing it out or elongating it to rotate the differential in a clockwise fashion will do that. It will rotate it in a clockwise fashion, but it will have the effect, because of the pivot point of the lower trailing arm is down here below the center of the axle tube, it will have the effect of taking this differential and pivoting it back, or pivoting it in a clockwise fashion, and also pushing it back towards the rear of the car. So I think when it's all said and done, the rear differential may be pushed back slightly. I don't know how much, maybe 1/4 of an inch. We'll find out. But this is how we're going to make the adjustment in our pinion angle. One of the other adjustments, which is I guess a fringe benefit of the kit that I ordered, is that you could also use these adjustable upper trailing arms to adjust your drivetrain in a side-to-side fashion as well. So let's say the driver's side portion is pointed towards the back of the car more, let's say, for instance. Then you could take this arm and you could adjust it to shorten it, and you could adjust this one on the left-hand side to lengthen it, and this would have the effect of moving the axle tube fore and aft, I guess you might say. So in addition to adjusting the pinion angle and rotating the differential, you also have the ability in this configuration to move the ends of your axle tubes fore and aft. So there's quite a bit of variability in the type of adjustments you can make. And lastly, one of the handy tools that you'll find, if you go to spicerparts.com, calculators, Driveline operating angle calculator, if you go to their website, there's a nice little Driveline calculator here, and it's really easy. It's just adding and subtracting is all it is. So basically it'll prove out the fact that, you know, the calculator I'm using is correct. So the driving member being the engine and transmission, the operating angle, or the angle off of horizontal for hours, is 6.5 degrees down. The drive shaft then is 1.8 down, and I changed that little switch there, and the drive shaft to pinion is 8 degrees up, and we calculate 4.7 and 9.8. So that proves out clearly that the working angle calculations here in the spreadsheet are correct. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. This will be the final video for 2022. Hey, I appreciate you guys stopping by the channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to be notified whenever I release a new video, don't forget to click the little bell down below. You know where it is. You guys have a good one, and remember to enjoy driving, maintaining, restoring, and caring for your classic car.